Good day, class, and welcome to another interesting session on PUL 342 Criminal Law 2. I'm your facilitator for this class, Dr. Akujobi Alera is my name, and we shall be looking at some interesting topics today. Remember, last week we started on topic 1, today we're on topic 2. On topic 1, we generally introduced what we are going to do under topic, the entire 342 under the whole session, and we looked at certain topics, basically talking about stealing and some what stealing is all about and different types of stealing as the case may be. Today we are going to continue also on offenses against property, and we shall be looking at other types of stealing. For instance, we shall be looking at false obtaining by receiving stolen goods. We shall be also be looking at false pretenses. We shall be looking at housebreaking and burglary. We shall be looking at demanding with menaces, and also we shall briefly be looking at robbery. And of course, at the end of this session, I expect you to be able to understand the differentiation of the different types so that you'll be able to place yourself properly at every given time and know that this is what is on ground, this is obtaining by false pretense, this is a case of receiving of stolen property. And even when questions are asked, you'll be able to differentiate one from the other by understanding what constitutes them, their elements, the punishment ascribed to them, and things like that. That will enable you to be able to know that this is a case of this is a case of that. Once again, as usual, it promises to be an interesting class with you there. So, welcome. Thank you. Good day. I'm Dr. Alera Akujobi, your facilitator for this class on PUL 342 Criminal Law. Today, we shall be looking at some topics under offenses against property. The last time we spoke on offense against property, and we talked on stealing and similar offenses under stealing and the different types of stealing. Today, we shall still be looking at offenses under property, and we shall be looking at false pretenses, also known as cheating, in other places. We shall also be looking at robbery, burglary and housebreaking, and other offenses that, of course, relate to property. At the end of the class, at the end of the day, we shall have some questions we'll look at in relation to these offenses. So when we talk about false pretenses, what do we have in mind? False pretense is a crime of obtaining property by fraud and it's a form of stealing. It actually involves the transfer of ownership or title from taken unlawfully and under false representation. It can be seen or defined as knowingly and unlawfully, obtaining title to and possession of the lawful property of another by means of deception and of course with intent to defraud. For instance, a man buying a car and paying for it with a worthless check. That is an example of false pretense. False pretense signifies mainly obtaining unlawfully and property, both possession and ownership, is being transferred to another person. It could involve money, it could involve property, both real and personal. It could also involve chosen action, and other intangible property may also be obtained by deception. Now, what section of the criminal code is this gotten from? We can see this under section 419 to section 418, to section 419 of the criminal code. Also, we also have it under section 382 of the penal code. Now, under the English law, under the Theft Act of 1968, the offense was formerly known as obtaining property by deception. This latter version is much wider than the former in the sense that the pretense may relate to law, facts, or intention, and the content is covered by the word dishonestly. So whether you use the word dishonestly, fraudulently, or unlawfully, it all implies about the same thing. The important thing is taken without consent, taken by deception, taken by misrepresentation. Now, like we said, this section can be gotten from under the criminal code from section 418 to 419 of the criminal code. And like I said before, under the penal code, you have it under section 320 of the penal code. So, under false pretenses, normally punishment is ranging between 3 years to 7 years. And like I said, it is a misrepresentation, basically. Now, in the case of Alake and the states, the court noted that for there to be false pretense, it must emanate from the accused person. So these are some of the things you must take note of as the elements of the offense of false pretense or cheating as in under the penal code. That one, it must emanate from the accused person, not from the victim or some other person, but from the accused person, the person that is being alleged to have induced fraudulently or dishonestly. One, it must be false as to the facts. It must be false as to the fact. The accused person that two or three, the accused person must know that it is a false misrepresentation. Whatever he is doing, he knows that it is dishonestly, he's doing it dishonestly. It also something that must be done, or whatever must be taken, must be something that is also capable of being stolen. If you remember our former classes where we gave instances of those things that can be deemed to have been taken or to be capable of being taken. And finally, it must also be such that the accused induced the owner to part with the property. Certain things that also must be taken into consideration is the fact that the false representation must be material. In other words, it must play an important role in a reasonable person's decision whether to enter into the fraudulent transaction or not. If, for instance, you are a regular customer, for instance, at a bank, and they know that you have normally come there with money, but uh, somehow you also know that that particular account you are referring to, you have no money there, and you come with a fraudulent a check and all that. They might honor the check only for them to find out later that that check it shouldn't have been honored. So what we've been able to do is that you have been able to play, you have been able to, through deception, make the person, whoever is involved, to believe that you are a person of you are a person that can afford it, and yet at the same time you know very well that you could not have been able to afford it. So um, if the defendant attempts to deceive another through misrepresentation, but the real facts are known to the other at the time that ownership changes hands, then of course again no crime has been committed. If, for instance, I want to get something from you, and I know that I coming to you I have no means to get acquired from you. I'm very very sure of that there's no way you can afford it, and at the same time I let you have it. I cannot come at the end of it to say that yes it was through deception that I gave it to you. No, for the fact that I knew beforehand that there's no way I could have been able to afford it, that was enough notice or enough information on the other person's part to know that this person cannot come and acquire such goods. So you cannot make reference to to have been falsely defrauded. So, for instance, I have an example here. If the defendant attempts to swindle another but fails, then he or she might be guilty of an attempt to gain property by false pretense, but not of the crime itself. The representation must relate to the present or past and not to the future. So, they must be obtaining from person to person and not through the ATM. Of course, you cannot say you collected money from the ATM fraudulently or whatever. So those are not what you can make reference to. It is also important to note that the misrepresentation must be orally, could be done orally or by writing or merely even keeping quiet. It's enough for you to misrepresent an issue. So if someone says without intending to mislead another, but which is misunderstood, he or she may be found guilty of false pretense if the misrepresentation results in transfer of ownership of something of value and the transfer was facilitated by the defendant transfer or lack of effort at correcting the misunderstanding. Many people are very good at keeping quiet when they should speak up, and at times silence implies consent. So when such happens under such condition or such circumstances, you cannot say that you were fully represented or that whatever was done under Section 419 or Section 320, 419 of the Criminal Code or 320 of the Penal Code. It is important to know that title can pass where there is sale of property. If the property is mainly leased, for instance, or loaned or borrowed, there has been no passing of property. For instance, the case of Odimayo, State and Odimayo, where the accused person were convicted of stealing money belonging to the housing corporation. In this instance, the accused person were given money for a purpose. The money belonging to the housing corporation for a purpose, but they used it for another purpose. The court held that they were convicted of stealing and not of false pretense. An exception to this general rule, of course, where money is concerned, is where money is concerned. Where an individual, for instance, loans money to another person because of false representation, it's generally not expected at the time the money at the time it's not expected that at the time the money will be returned, that false pretense the crime of false pretense may be tried. Of course, when one loans money for a particular purpose and all that, what is important is that that money should be used for the purpose for which it was or for which it was loaned for. But when it is being used for some other purpose, one might begin to ask, is the offense there that of false pretense or that of stealing? So you need to really look at it very well to ensure that what you are charging the person for is a false pretense or they are or are not stealing. Their elements varies, and then you should be able to look for the differences, the differences that are in there. Again, what are some of these defenses that are open where you can say that you cannot be charged for false pretense? For instance, you can say so when you are able to establish that you had no intent to defraud. If you're able to convince the court in that light, of course, you would have been able to raise a defense. Or that the victim that is claiming to have lost something, or that's claiming to have misplaced something, or is missing out on something, cannot rely on that claim because he has suffered no loss, no monetary loss, no pecuniary loss, or whatever. Or if the victim was too gullible, and of course, you cannot come and say when you know very well that this particular item you are giving out is not supposed to be that particular cost, and you are getting it at that particular cost, or the person is selling it off at that particular cost. He cannot allege later that he was falsely deceived, or that he was falsely the representation was false. That will not avail him at that time. So we have said that these are some of the things you look for when you are talking about false pretenses. Again, in Alake and the states, Nikki Toby JCA, uh, um, his remark was instructive in the sense it defined false pretense as the act of pretending. That is to say, to make a person believe in a situation which in reality is not true. It also means an appearance to show or hide, to hide a reality, a false show, a false allegation, a charm. It also means a pretension or a pretense. So we have seen that these are all examples of what a pretense can be. It could be a scam, it could be a pretense, it could be all kind of things just to give a false reality of what is not true. So we shall continue. So I want to believe that with this said, that first project could be oral, it could be in writing, it could be by your action, it could be in writing, it could also be enhanced by one keeping quiet to what one should have spoken out against. And when one decides to keep quiet, of course, you cannot raise that particular defense. So we shall go to another type of stealing, which is obtaining stolen property. Again, like I said, at the end of this facilitation, I have a question that will kind of cover most of what we have done, or even all of what we have done here. So when we talk of obtaining stolen property, what are those things we basically look out for? So first of all, what is the section? You have it under section 427 of the Criminal Code, and also under section 316 of the Penal Code. And what does it mean? It could be a felony, it could also be a misdemeanor. So what are those elements basically that you look out for One is that the accused person alone or jointly with some other person has the thing in his possession or aided in concealing or disposing of it. Possession of one whom you have control of. So now let's take it one by one. So, for instance, you are looking for a property that has been taken away that you cannot find, and you find that property with the accused person. So, you can say that the accused person, or with together with one A, B, and C, have the thing in their possession, okay, or they are helping to hide it, or to are helping to want to dispose of it, okay. That is one. Then two, you can say that you met the property with the accused acquaintance, or with somebody working for the accused, or living with the accused. So possession of the property was with one whom the accused had control over. Also, that is also known as constructive possession. Like the first one that we talked about, which is the property being found with the accused person, known as actual possession. Also, the fact that knowledge that the property is stolen. If, for instance, the accused person took that property knowing that the property was stolen, of course, he would then be deemed to have obtained stolen property. Another way you can also know that a property is stolen, or what you are buying is not what you should buy or have been tampered with, it's when such good is being sold at a ridiculously low price. That should raise up that should make you to be more cautious of what you are buying. That one has to be careful. This prop apparently could be a stolen good. So punishment normally ranges from 7 years to 14 years. Basically, you will need to go through your codes in order to understand some of these things better, and instances or cases that you could also make reference to in 0 of the to 4110, 410 to 411 of the Criminal Code, and Section 346 of the Penal Code. So, also under the Penal Code, it refers to the period between the two periods as sunrise and sunset. So, and also the time when the breaking is within the daytime, how it is known as housebreaking. When it is within the night, it is known as burglary. Again, the case of State and Owen Mooney is also very instructive, and the case of R and Smith. So please take note of these cases so that you can go back to them and make reference to them. Now, we're looking briefly at another type of offense against property, which is that of robbery. What is robbery? Robbery, like they always say, is a more serious form of stealing, or it's an aggravated form of stealing, you know. And so, invariably, elements of stealing is an essential element of robbery. In other words, must be applicable to what can be stolen, and what is of value, what has ownership, and things like that. So, applicable sections are Section 382, 383, 410, 410. 410 also extends to the use of violence against the property itself. The offense is committed against not just the owner, but also all those around. So, what are those elements? So, elements are that there must be stealing, you know. So, I will know what constitutes stealing, and also that the victim was present to constitute the stealing, as in Ugwaja and COP. Then there must also be apprehension of fear, and there must be a connection between the thing stolen and the violence. In other words, you cannot be complaining of somebody came today to maybe something that has been stolen previously, and maybe the time that the robbery took place was maybe 2 weeks later, and you are trying to connect that robbery to what was stolen some 2 weeks back. It doesn't work that way. So there must be a connect between what is stolen and the time of violence, which is very, very important. So punishment for robbery, according to the statute, is 21 years imprisonment. Now, it is also important for you to know that to constitute robbery, the force used by the accused must be applied at the time or immediately before, or at the time or after the time of stealing. Where the force is well after the stealing, it cannot be robbery. I hope we are taking note of this. That where the force is well after the time of stealing, of course, you cannot be saying you've been robbed. Maybe after some 2 days later, there was some kind of fraud that was, but it had nothing to do with what was stolen. You cannot say that what you've been robbed of that particular item. So so what we're trying to say now is that we should note that the threat of violence is incapable of execution, as where a toy gun is used or an unloaded gun is used. But the offense will be committed where the circumstances are such that a reasonable person would anticipate violence. It is one thing to know that the gun or the toy gun or the gun used was not loaded. Where that is the case, robbery might not be there because there was really no apprehension of fear. But at the same time, somebody that knows not whether it is a toy gun or not, and you pointing that toy gun at the person, you've been able to raise some kind of fear in the mind of such a person. Of course, you can raise the offense or you can bring up a charge of robbery against such a person. In Babalola and the state, it was held that where a person threatens without another with a gun, where a person threatens another with a gun, the natural inference is that the threatened person would receive actual violence. It could not be expected to ask the person threatening him to show him whether the gun was loaded or not. I think that explains that particular point I was trying to make earlier. So we can see that in that case of Babalola and the state. Again, in Ochi and the state, the court held that threat or actual violence, uh, as required by law, must include the very situation of hopelessness, whereby the victim had no choice but to comply with the demands of the assailant. He had no choice but to comply with the demand of the assailant. So that is it on robbery. Again, we hear of robbery, we hear of armed robbery. Is there any difference? Lastly, let us ask ourselves a question. Once we're able to answer this question, we should be able to, then we would have been able to put our mind at rest that we've understood basically what we've discussed. The question is, distinguish the offense of stealing from the offenses of false pretense, armed robbery, and burglary. Okay? Maybe you might also include receiving stolen property. What do these offenses have in common? So, apart from distinguishing, we're also going to state their similarity. That is stating what they have in common. And there's no how you'll be able to do it if you don't understand the elements of each offense. You must be able to understand how the definition flows, what constitutes that particular offense in order to be able to answer it. So by the time you have been able to answer it, it expects you, this question, for instance, expects you to talk about what stealing is and what are its elements, what is false pretense, what is its element, what is robbery, what is its element, what is burglary, what is its element. Does it have anything common? Does a false offense have anything common with stealing? Does robbery have anything common with stealing? Does burglary have anything common with stealing? Then two, what are their differences? So you can see that by the time you're able to answer this question, basically you would have touched on all the areas we've just spoken about in this class. So thank you once again for your time. We'll see you again. Thank you very much.